AP 120, Chapter 12, Topics, Platelets and Plasma. So, we're back in the red bone marrow, and the hematopoietic stem cells will divide and produce special cells called megakaryocytes. The megakaryocytes will remain in the red bone marrow, and they'll bleb off portions of themselves into the bloodstream, and it's those cell fragments that are the platelets. So because the platelets are cell fragments, they don't have a nucleus, they lack most of the organelles, and so on. So platelets help to repair damaged blood vessels. They are able to adhere to the broken edges of the blood vessels, and then they even end up closing off the smaller damaged blood vessels. And this can help to control blood loss. See, here they are at rest, here they are when they're active. They're obviously reaching out to grab stuff. All right, plasma. Plasma is the fluid portion of blood. It is sort of straw colored, and as we know, it's 92% water. It is mostly water. And its functions is in transporting nutrients and gases, especially carbon dioxide. Helps to regulate fluid and electrolyte balance, and it maintains a favorable pH. So the pH of blood ideally will be found between 7.35 and 7.45. Remember that the pH of blood is 7.35 to 7.45. Pretty narrow range. Then all of the various fluids in our tissues and our body come from plasma in blood. So this includes the interstitial fluids surrounding cells found in tissues. It includes the lymph fluid for the lymphatic system. It includes the cerebral spinal fluid found surrounding the brain and spinal cord, and so on. So there are also plasma proteins found in blood. One type of plasma protein is albumins. Albumins make up about 60% of the plasma proteins in plasma, and their function is to maintain a high osmotic pressure. So basically, because of their presence in the blood plasma, they make the blood slightly more hypertonic than the interstitial fluids, because the proteins don't leave the bloodstream normally. And so that means water is going to want to go back into the bloodstream. So basically, albumins help to make sure that water wants to continually go back into the bloodstream via osmosis. Then we have globulins. Globulins make up about 36% of the plasma proteins. There are alpha-beta globulins. They're involved in transporting lipids, fat-soluble vitamins, and steroid hormones. So the globulins, alpha and beta globulins, are important for moving things that are hydrophobic, things that fear water, moving hydrophobic substances throughout the bloodstream. So they act kind of like an Uber to move lipids, fat-soluble vitamins, and steroid hormones. And then we also have the gamma globulins. Gamma globulins are important because they are the antibodies. They are the specialized proteins that bind to specific pathogens that can cause illness. So gamma globulins are the antibodies. Third category of plasma proteins is fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is inactive, but when it becomes activated, it is key in forming blood clots. So when fibrinogen gets converted into fibrin, it becomes active and then causes blood clots, which, when you have an injury and are bleeding out, is a very important function. Also found in plasma are various gases. You've got nitrogen, lots of nitrogen, but it doesn't really do anything. It's just there. The important gases, though, is oxygen and carbon dioxide. So there is some oxygen in the plasma. The rest of it's in the red blood cells. And then there is a lot of carbon dioxide in the plasma, although some of it is also found in red blood cells. So nutrients, amino acids, monosaccharides, nucleotides, lipids, all coming from the digestive tract. And of course, the hydrophobic lipids, as we know, are carried by plasma proteins, specifically alpha and beta globulins. Wastes. Wastes are also found in plasma, including urea and uric acid. Urea and uric acid are waste products of protein and nucleic acid metabolism. So when amino acids are being broken down or formation of nucleic acids, these sort of things occurring in the liver lead to production of this waste product, urea and uric acid, which then goes in the bloodstream, travels throughout the body, and then arrives at the kidneys where they are removed from the bloodstream in the process of forming urine. Urea, urine. And then there are electrolytes. These are ions. So sodium ions, potassium ions, calcium ions, magnesium ions, etc., etc. Lots of ions, lots of electrolytes found in the plasma. They can be absorbed by the intestines and brought into the bloodstream, or they could be released from cells via cellular metabolism. And of course, an important ion is the ones that help to control pH. So the ions that help to control the pH, keeping it between 7.35 and 7.45. And remember, pH is the concentration of hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions are a type of electrolyte. Hemostasis, stopping of bleeding. Well, this is a three-part process. First off, you have your injury. The blood vessel is damaged. So when the blood vessel is damaged, you get a blood vessel spasm. The muscular tissue within the blood vessel will contract. This is a reflex called a vasospasm, constricting some of the blood from flowing through the damaged blood vessel. And then platelets will release the chemical serotonin. And serotonin will also cause a constriction of the smooth muscle tissue in blood vessel walls. So the first thing after an injury, blood vessel spasm, causing them to contract and less blood to flow through them. Then we have platelet plug formation. As we mentioned earlier, the platelets will bind to the ragged edges of a damaged blood vessel, and they'll start to form a net, and that net will continue to fill to form what's called a platelet plug, which will actually completely block the blood vessel so blood loss is minimized. Now, platelet plugs only work for small blood vessels. They don't work for all blood vessels. But when they do work, they are very helpful. Finally, we have blood coagulation. Blood coagulation, also known as blood clotting. This is a very effective way to stop bleeding. So it's very important for hemostasis. And basically, the damaged tissues are going to release chemicals, and these chemicals will help to activate clotting factors and also activate platelets. And this includes the production of a hormone called thrombin. Thrombin, this enzyme, thrombin, this enzyme converts fibrinogen into fibrin. So it activates the fibrinogen to allow fibrin to then form this sticky mesh. So the yellow strands, these are fibrin proteins coming together to form these long sticky meshes that can catch blood cells. So there's lots of red blood cells associated with a blood clot, and this clotting then stimulates more clotting. So blood clotting is actually a positive feedback. So blood clots can get really big. There are videos on the YouTube of people pulling large, huge blood clots out of their nostrils. Pretty nasty. I do not recommend watching it. So, tissue damage. We get the blood vessel spasm to initially constrict the blood vessels. We get platelet plug formation to potentially plug up the blood vessels. And then we get clotting. Clotting is a complicated process, but basically we end up having thrombin enzyme produced and released into the blood. Then thrombin will convert fibrinogen into fibrin, and fibrin leads to the formation of the blood clot itself. And you'll notice that calcium is important in this process. So we need calcium to help us when we want to form blood clots. Hemophilia. Hemophilia is a genetic condition caused by a defective or absent gene for specific clotting factors. And what happens is then the person has difficulty or is completely prevented from forming blood clots. And that is a major health risk because then even a minor injury can cause them to bleed to death. So a small cut that in someone else is insignificant, doesn't even need stitches, could cause someone with hemophilia to bleed out and die. And that also means that they experience frequent bruising because we do have a lot of tiny injuries throughout our body that occur that we don't even know happen and heal on their own. But someone with hemophilia could end up getting bruises because of those micro injuries. And this could include inside of, say, joints like the knee. So this person's got major blood buildup in that joint. And also in the brain, which could cause major problems. Hemophilia is treatable. There is medication for it. And that medication, someone with hemophilia needs to get an injection every day. And each injection costs about $1,000. All right, so eventually the blood is no longer going to be bleeding out. The stopping of bleeding will be successful. So we also need to break down blood clots. And so the protein plasminogen gets converted into plasmin. Plasmin will then break down fibrin, and then fibroblasts can come into the area wherever the damage to the tissue is and start repairing the damaged tissue. You got to get the blood clot out of the way before fibroblasts can come in to fix the tissue. Abnormal blood clots is when a blood clot develops in a vessel that isn't really injured, isn't necessary, and those are called thrombus. So thrombus is an abnormal blood clot in a blood vessel, usually. Actually, they are formed often on slightly damaged blood vessels. They might have a tiny bit of injury on the inside, and then this thrombus is formed, and then if it dislodges and enters the bloodstream fully, it's called an embolus. So an embolus is a blood clot that's traveling throughout the blood vessels. Now, a embolus normally isn't a big deal, but some people have atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is when their blood vessels develop these fatty plaques on the inside. So you go from having a large open space in a, say, critical artery to having a much smaller lumen, a much smaller space because of the plaques that have formed. And so then a small blood clot, a small embolus, could then lodge into this smaller space, blocking off the blood flow through that artery. And if that artery is a critical artery, it could lead to a heart attack or a stroke. That is it for this part of the lecture.